Although Tess needs no introduction, I am going to introduce her anyway. So Dr. Tess Machling is an independent researcher who studies Iron Age gold, torcs, as we've just mentioned, in particular. And she works with Roland Williamson, who I know is also on the call this morning, and a team of goldsmiths and jewellers, and looks at things from a craft perspective. And in doing so, they have uncovered new methods and gained insights into goldworking in Iron Age Britain. And they have a very groovy website called the bigbookoftorcs.com, for those of you who like all things shiny. So Tess's talk this morning is entitled, "When is a bracelet not a bracelet, and why could this matter? The Snettisham bracelet re-examined." So take it away, Tess.
Hello. Right, let's just check that screen sharing is going to work. Can you see that?
Not yet, but it says you've started.
Yeah.
Now let's get it to do its thing. Come on. It's slow. Right, can everyone see that? Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up. Thumbs up from George. Yeah, brilliant. Hello, everybody. Yeah, as you know, Roll and I normally look at torcs, but there's this intriguing little object, the Snettisham bracelet, which is it's obviously decorated in Snettisham style, and it came up in 1950 and was ploughed up by Tom Rout on the Ken Hill estate. One of the earliest finds, the only previous finds before that were 1948. And when it was found, it was attached to the Great Torc, as you can see here, and attached using this bit of buffer terminal torc that had been threaded through the terminals of the Great Torc to hold it in place. And if anyone's interested, that's a ransom tractor. Don't ask, it's a long story. Well, this is slow. I'm hoping this is going to change slide. Right, so this is it, and as you can see, it's bent at the back here where it was attached onto the torc. It seems to be bent, as you know, it wasn't bent before it went in the ground. It was part of the business of it being tied to the torc. So the bracelet, this is from Jope at the bottom here, it's decorated the whole way along. And on this, it's got it's got a little trapdoor, which I actually only saw this a couple of weeks ago. Now, we're currently not sure whether that is part of the manufacturing process. It looks a bit scruffy to be that, to be honest, whether it is a contemporary repair or whether it's a, how to put this, modern British Museum conservation, because we have seen with a couple of the other torcs that they have been adapted, shall we say, if they didn't quite look as they were. And obviously with this, it's already been taken apart from the rest of the assemblage association with the Great Torc. Now this bit down on the left, not entirely sure about this yet, but this might be a little, you know, we're all into our construction and craft technique. This might be a little hint of how they did it, because we've got the design slightly overlapping there. The problem being there's also a section towards the right here where there is a slightly larger panel too. So not sure. I think I can see something on the back on the inside of this, in which case this would suggest it's been decorated before it's actually been closed, and then they've had that kind of wallpaper job thing of not quite getting the things right. Seems a bit skeptical about that. They're too good at this stuff to make that kind of error. Now, on the British Museum catalogue, it's described as a bracelet. And obviously what we've got at the moment, as you can see here, it's pretty dented, so you can try and get measurements. Also, the measurements that are given on the catalogue are the greatest external, the greatest internal, etc., etc. If you're actually talking about wearing something, that doesn't actually mean a lot. So Sophie and I, when I went into the British Museum a couple of weeks ago, measured it. There's a section of it here on the right, which is more, it seems less altered. And if you use a pottery rim charts, which a lot of you will know about, you get an internal diameter of 80 millimeters. And when we kind of traced around the circumference with a fabric tape measure, we got 74 millimeters. So that suggests that it's actually got an internal diameter of 75 to 80 millimeters. Now that probably means nothing, but if you start thinking about what that actually looks like. Now, work by Ellen Swift, who was looking at hundreds of Roman and late antique Egyptian arm rings, they could show that bracelets are generally 65 to 70 millimeters or smaller. So if you have a look, if you've got bracelets, that's likely to be the dimensions that they are. But above that, between about 70 to 80 millimeters is likely to be for wear on the upper arm. So either somewhere like that or over the elbow or perhaps over sleeves, but it's quite different. Newnham Croft, the internal is 65 millimeters. Most other kind of bangles, bracelets, that kind of thing, that is the desired measurement. It doesn't matter where you are, 65 to 70 mil seems to be about right for a bracelet. So it's not actually a bracelet, it's an arm ring. Now, if you have a look at what other things are going on around, all of these things, the background to them, they're supposed to be kind of 2nd century, 1st century. But when you actually start looking, if you see here, Waldalgersheim that Andrew was talking about earlier, there is this arm ring. It's not a bracelet. These two are bracelets. This one, obviously, neck torque. This is an arm ring. You then look at Erstfeld. You've got a selection of torques with bracelets. Liegfrith, you've got 3 torques and a bracelet. So are we looking at, can we start talking about dates for things? Erstfeld, Waldalgersheim, Liegfrith, all thought to be 4th century. Why are we not talking about that for some of the Snettisham material? So as I say, torques found with bracelets and arm rings are often 4th century. When you look at Nethererd, classic Snettisham style terminal, you've got 1 torque terminal, some coins, and 3 arm rings. Now, those arm rings, the internal diameter is 83 to 90 millimeters. Now, we may be looking at small neck torques, and also, obviously, with anything that has an open entrance, you can't quite know exactly what the diameter was designed to be because it could have closed slightly or opened slightly. But we're more in the zone of arm rings than we are in the zone for neck rings. And when we start looking at technology, if we compare this to the bracelet again, we're seeing similar things. So Waldalgersheim is 2 hollow tubes with a piece of wire wrapped around. Liegfrith, again, similar hollow tubes, piece of wire wrapped round. Erstfeld, hollow tubes again. And when we look at the bracelet, this is sheet gold made. It's actually, it looks as if it might be 2 tubes that with this central thing, or I was actually talking to Rob about this the other day. It could actually be a kind of shape like that that's been almost pressed in. So it's not actually 2 tubes, it's kind of forming 2 tubes, if you see what I mean. But it's hollow. So again, we've got comparisons, sheet gold, hollow, often 2 tubes, again, typical of the 4th century. Now the decoration on this one is quite interesting. The standard Snettisham style that we kind of see across the rest of the other gold work, there are elements of comparison. So we have got the roundels, these little bits here. We've got the dummy rivets, the little eyes in the middle. We've got basket work and tooling here. And we've also got the kind of 3D, but low 3D relief typical of Snettisham. But what we've also got on this bracelet is this very odd symmetry, which we don't see on torcs. We've also got these incised semicircles and straight lines, and at the end of each semicircle is a little tiny dot. So what we're looking at on this torc is something that's not, it's kind of relating to the torcs, but it's not entirely torcs. And when we look at the comparisons for this, we can see that actually there's a lot of material. These are all bits of tubular torc. This one is unstrapped. These two are hors-d'oeuvre, that actually have some of these similar things going on. So you can see here, we've got the semicircles with the dots at the end. On this one, they're slightly more triangular, but again, they've got the dots at the end. Same again here, up, down, dots at the end, and there we have them there. We've also got these incised lines, which this fineness of incising, we don't see it on the torcs. There are kind of tooled lines, but they're not these very, very thin ones. And we've also, again, got this symmetry coming through. So you've got this kind of diamond symmetry here. You've got a symmetrical line up here with almost like the peacock feather in the center of it, and these designs replicating on either side. Again, the grotesque torc, symmetrical about the center, listener crocker, symmetrical is out the center, and then the arm ring. So again, we're seeing what's appearing on the arm ring, looking with the most common comparisons for it are 4th and 3rd century BC. We've also got wider similarities from some of these earlier Snettisham torcs as well. This kind of concentric circles offset here that we can see here in this deal strap hanger, whatever it is, and the two torcs. You can see here, it feels very similar. In turn, also the concentric circles, we've got the concentric circles included as designs within Nethererd and the Great Torc as well. Again, 4th, 3rd century BC over on here, but these, we still talk about them being much later. Why? Now, when you actually look, we're back to weights again. So 110 grams are 111 grams. Now, for those of you who like their torc equivalents, that is 1 lemon, 1 small banana, or a small bar of Galaxy chocolate. So you'll know. When you pick this bracelet up, it's actually remarkably heavy. It surprised me. I didn't think it would be that heavy. But again, scaled to the similar size, these two are both the same amount of gold. This one we know is 0.1 mil thick sheet. This has to be about 0.6 to 0.8 millimeters. It's not relating to this technology, it's thicker. And the interesting thing is that measurement, that sheet thickness of 0.6 to 0.8 millimeters is absolutely classic for the sheet gold torus torcs. So Nethererd, the Great Torc, the grotesque, rather than the later or earlier tubular torcs, those highly decorated torcs that were showing the more kind of Valdalgesheim type vegetal decoration are all about 0.1, 0.2 millimeters as well. This kind of sits very, very happily within torus torc technology. So I'm going to argue that what we're looking at with this arm ring is that it could well be a kind of missing link that relates earlier gold work to what comes after that, which would be the kind of Snettisham torcs. It doesn't fit with later stuff. The whole kind of Snettisham style picture, particularly in this, it pulls you back early the whole time. It just isn't late. So the current thinking on the dating of these torcs, for the grotesque torc, we've got Jody talking about the grotesque torc being 3rd century BC, classic plastic style dating. We've also got this assumption that in the 2nd century, as coins become imported, a lot more gold jewellery is made. So this would be things like, this is assumed to be things like the Snettisham Great Torc, etc., because there's a sudden influx of coinage. Stead talks about the decoration being stage 5 in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. And even in recent books, the Celtic art, the Celts exhibition, the caption for the Snettisham Great Torc is showing 100 BC. So the general thinking is plastic, 3rd century, Snettisham style from 200 BC. But the Dating Celtic Art project that Duncan Garrow and Chris Gosden, etc., did, they got some pretty early dates, and they didn't go as early as the dates gave, but they then started suggesting that maybe we are actually looking for a 3rd century BC date, because although there weren't many of these dates, they were pretty secure. Coming back to the technology, the other aspect that we have shown, both the Snettisham Great Torc and the grotesque torc are constructed using the same torus and core technology. And just a quick hint, if you think about horn caps, if you actually take the torus and stick it on top, there's a relationship there between them. But what the current thinking suggests is this one is 200 BC, this one is kind of 100 BC. But they are both using the same technology. Are we just being blinded by art here? Again, another bit of evidence from another piece of work we've been doing, the problem of the Clevedon torc, where MacDonald and various others have talked about how the Clevedon torc shows that actually decorative motifs are continuing throughout the centuries because we have these kind of palmettes, pelters on the side, and yet these very typical stage 5 triskelias on the front. But as we've shown, if this was actually originally a torus torc, which you can see here, cut down, turned over, new cap on top, we might actually be looking at dates for the remodeling of something. So this is originally stage 1, and then later on, I don't think it's as late as they think it is, it's then capped, and all the dimensions fit for this having happened. So again, we're throwing up potential 4th century origins. So from everything I've shown today, I think it's possible to suggest that the Snettisham armouring could comfortably bridge the gap between the earlier 4th century BC typical Valdagsheim vegetal style technologies. So we're looking at things like sheet work, tubular construction techniques, and the decoration, which is the incised lines, symmetrical patterns. And then the Snettisham style decoration, which is the more classic dummy rivets, basket work, tooling, roundels, etc. And the technology of Snettisham style gold work, which is about 0.6 to 0.8 millimetre thick gold sheet and constructed into these quite complex forms. Therefore, we'd say that the date of the gold sheet torus torcs really needs to be recalibrated, and that Snettisham style should be seen as developing from as early as the 4th century BC. So it could be seen as another parallel divergent insular British art style arising from the Valdagsheim vegetal style. The other thing that I would slightly question is we have this assumption, we've already seen this with Snettisham and the north, that, you know, historically everything came from East Anglia and went out. We are now starting to show that that isn't necessarily the case. We don't actually have evidence for that. It's equally possible it was coming into East Anglia. I think the thing we haven't really looked at, in terms of the continent, we see everything coming from the continent. I don't necessarily think this is the case. It isn't in the Bronze Age. Why are we assuming this in the Iron Age? I think it's equally possible that we are sending ideas out. And the problem that we have with dating is this is very difficult to spot. We're just assuming that continent first, these islands second. And I don't think we can actually show that. as I've shown with the various other different things, the deal, horse fitting, if you actually start comparing design elements on torus torcs and other early decorative items, you again start coming back to the 4th century. So as I say, maybe we should start actually looking at this as another kind of part of the family tree that comes out from Waldalgesheim type style. And maybe we're looking at, maybe we are just looking at art preference, you know, that plastic art, they're using the same technologies underneath to create these things. Why are they doing that? And I would also argue that maybe we need to put back the dates for several of these styles. And if we do that, suddenly those earlier dates that came up from the Dating Celtic Art project would actually fit much more comfortably. We'd be looking at a kind of development of the style from the early 4th century. It would also explain various things to do with Snettisham, that we have so many different types of torcs later on which don't relate much at all to the earlier ones. I think the problem is we've looked at Snettisham and we've squished everything into East Anglia and looked at that massive assemblage, which actually is a complete anomaly. But when you start looking beyond, if you look at Leekfrith, if you look at Blair Drummond, if you look at all the various other finds, Nethererd, of torcs, we start seeing what is perhaps a more usual picture rather than a kind of final moment deposition phase, which is what seems to be happening at Snettisham. So there we go. I would argue that the gold torcs are 4th to 3rd century origin. Thank you.
Brilliant, Tess, completely. And very, very shiny as well.
Yes.
Can I ask you about, well, firstly, I have no idea how you would twist hollow tubes of gold to make torcs, but that's a whole other explanation. But is this sort of changing skill levels as you go through? Because obviously there's different styles that you've highlighted. Can you, I mean,
I think
three
so.
different sort of skill, are they getting better or worse, or how does the sort of skill levels work as you go through?
Yeah, I mean, they're changing. Sheet work, you really need to know how to work gold. If you're casting, obviously, that is a skill that's been around for a long time. They are making tools, you know, I'm sure every village had a caster who was doing this, that, and the other. It's not that difficult to do. But I think if you're working sheet gold, sheet bronze as well, and there is a comparison between the thickness between sheet gold and sheet bronze, you do need to know what you're doing. And I think that skill is dying out. And I think that's where the South and East, they are trying to copy, and they're getting it wrong every time, as people know who've heard me talk before. Castings are always rubbish because they're trying to produce something that is essentially a sheet item, but you just can't cast it. Roll may have ideas about this. Where is he?
He's hiding, Tess.
Is he
can I just, I've got another question to pick out of the, if Roll doesn't join us, or we can come back to him. A quick question, where in your experience does the arm ring end and the torque or neck ring begin in terms of diameter? And I suppose also bracelet, you know, how far up the arm do you need to go? Where is your dividing point?
Yeah, I'm still not, I think by the time you get to about 80 millimeters, you are well and truly over your elbow. But it is interesting if you actually look, and obviously there's only so many closed rings that we've got where you can accurately estimate the size. It's just interesting that we're seeing these pairings, like I was saying. So something like Nethererd, we wouldn't have thought of as particularly arm rings before. We might have thought of them as small neck rings. But if you do start looking at other hoards, they could be. I don't think it's anything definitive, but I think it's just, yeah, we just need to be aware of it, I think.
I spotted that Roland has unmuted himself, so he's appeared, Tess, if you want to bring him in.
Can you hear me?
I'll give you the figure. What do you think?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yeah. I just added in chat. Because I'm operating my phone, I'm busy prodding it and things happen or don't. It is. Sheetwork is a premier sort of technique, quite simply that. You are, as we've pointed out with the torch, you're taking a precious resource and making it go that much further with that much more finesse. Casting, for all of the wonderful things you can do, is kind of clumsy by comparison. There, I'd leave it at that, quite simply that.
So if we have got any more questions for any of our speakers this morning, there's a few more minutes before we break.
Please pick me up, someone. I need to be bulletproof. So if you can see flaws, tell me before I write the paper.
Tess, what was your view on the little square trapdoor thing that we saw? It's probably not a trapdoor. I know you described it as a trapdoor in one of the earlier slides. Do you think that's a modern repair rather than, because it looks terribly square and we don't do square?
No, yeah, the gold match is very good, which would suggest it might be older. I mean, it could be. Again, Roll, any ideas? Is he hidden in
the propensity for people to have to have fiddled about with elements of the great torc when it first came up. There was a hole in the side of one of the terminals which they fixed, which would have allowed us to inspect the interior, but somebody decided it was better off mended at some point, and it's unrecorded. So it sounds really implausible. It seems implausible for the origins of the pieces, for it to even have a hole and be left so, fixed in such a gash fashion. And likewise, I don't know. I'm conflicted about it, quite simply. It's just pure weird.
I mean, you were suggesting the other day, because it hasn't bent in that piece, it could have actually strengthened it slightly. So would be a contemporary repair.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, because any joint you create in metal, you're actually, by and large, unless you've deliberately prepared it in certain ways, and this doesn't follow that, is that where you add another layer on around the perimeter of the hole or whatever is behind the patch, you've now doubled up the thickness of the metal, and that is now perforce stiffer than any of the metal surrounding it. Hence why it hasn't buckled.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
It's not the same level as repairs as you see on the grotesque torc, which is, I think, as if you've described as well, it's not subtle, is it? Really, the grotesque? No.
They look like somebody's done them in a panic and prepared. It's the dog ate my homework level of repair on the grotesque. Literally.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the thing that surprises me about the bracelet repair. It's not as good as I would expect it to be, because they've obviously soldered it. If it is a contemporary repair, it's someone who kind of knows what they're doing, and I would have expected them to make it a lot less obvious. Or it's something to do with the construction. If they had potentially filled that with pitch or tar or something like that before decorating it, that little trapdoor might be a means of getting that out. I don't know. More work needed. We say that all the time. But yeah, more work needed.
No.
Oh, now Jodie has just popped something into the chat saying, I think the problem lies in the kind of toolkit of styles available. Stead himself has admitted his original dating was probably quite late for some styles, and it looks like many of them actually coalesce in the 3rd century, at least in Britain. The Snettisham torcs definitely draw on many styles, and it's quite likely that many of the torcs were actually pretty old when they went in the ground. What you see at Snettisham is a kind of centuries-old tradition of torc making coming to an end in the early 1st century, BC. It's hard because much of this I've written about, but Snettisham publication is still in progress.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing it, Jodie.
So if have we got any more questions coming in for any of the session's speakers, bung them in the chat now, or if it's if everybody is in need of a lunch break, we can always, pop questions in the chat, and I'm sure the speakers will